Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to
Renee.
the NEA Big Read Door County. NEA Big Read is a program of the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest. And Right On is very happy to be partnering with Door County Library on the programs this year. For those of you who are not familiar with us, Right On is both a nonprofit writing center and a writer's residency program on the Door County Peninsula in Northeast Wisconsin. Right On is located on land that is home to the Potawatomi, as well as the Winnebago Ho-Chunk, Ojibwe, Noquay, Sauk, Menominee, and Ottawa tribes. We acknowledge this space as their land and their home. This morning, we are very happy to be joined by poet Athena Kildregard, who is going to talk about the intersections between music and poetry. Athena is coming to us from Morris, Minnesota, where it is colder than we are here in Door County by several degrees. Athena is the author of 5 collections of poetry, and her 6th will be coming out later this spring, so please watch for that. And Athena is also going to be leading a 3-week class for us on using music in revising your poetry, and that class will start this Tuesday. So if you're interested, please visit our website for details on that. And with that, I turn it over to Athena.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you to Jared and to Right On Door County, which is one of my favorite places on the planet. I've been lucky enough to do a couple residencies there, which have been just absolutely magical. And thank you also to the Door County Library and to Morgan, who I just met, who's a master at organizing and running these kinds of events. So I'm really thrilled to be here. I think it's amazing also to be doing this talk in conjunction with the Door County Big Reads. They're reading Hilary St. John Mandel's book, Station 11, which if you haven't read it, I recommend it highly. It's a book I started reading on a Sunday morning and I literally couldn't put it down. I went to bed when I finished it. It's really a remarkable book. This talk that I'm giving today grows out of somewhat recent interest that I've taken in the intersection between poetry and art song. So I've known about this for a long time, but I've been lucky enough in the last few years to have some of my poems set by composers, and I received a grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board that allowed me to commission the Minnesota composer Linda Kockelmeyer to set some of my poems from my book course. And in addition, I have a daughter who's pursuing a career in singing. So all of these things have kind of swirled together in my life. And I'm really thrilled to be here today to talk to you about these things. So music, I'm looking down because I have my notes here. I hope you'll forgive me. Music and poetry have been blood sisters for a pretty long time, as you know, I think. The earliest poems were sung. And as far as we know, they were accompanied by an instrument. And one of those instruments was the lyre. And it is the word lyre that gives us the word lyric. So not just lyrics as in song lyrics, but also lyric as in lyric poetry, poetry that has a particular singing quality to it. I've been reading a really wonderful book called The Master and the Emissary by a chap named Ian McGilchrist, who's a psychiatrist and has been studying neuroimaging, thinking about the brain. And this book is about the 2 halves of the brain, the 2 hemispheres of the brain. And one of the things he argues, and he's not alone in this, is that human beings sang before we talked. So by singing, I mean made music, not that they were singing words, but they were singing melodies. So think whales in the ocean depths singing. Maybe someday whales will burst out into words. Who knows? But his argument is that this is what has happened with human beings, and I love this idea of early hunter gatherers communicating with one another by making music with their voices, and there's physical evidence to suggest that this happened. Right. So we began by singing, and then we developed language and we began writing. I'm sad to report to you that the first writing was administrative lists. What the heck? But pretty soon we began writing poetry. In fact, humans wrote poetry before we wrote prose. Prose came along after poetry. So there's a very close relationship between music and poetry. And I was really struck by this close relationship, and lots of other people too, when we listened to Amanda Gorman read her poem, recite her poem at the inauguration. And, she was drawing also on recent music traditions, of course, hip hop and Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical Hamilton that she was quoting in some ways in her poem. So we continue to have this very deliciously close relationship between poetry and music. McGilchrist, the fellow I was speaking of before, observes that music is grounded in the body, right? Of course. I mean, one of the delights of singing is we throw our whole body into it in some way. So it's grounded in the body. And that also means that music is grounded in our experience, and it's a means of communication. And music taps into our sense of empathy, our sense of feeling a connection with other human beings. It seems to me that all these things describe poetry as well, right? Grounded in the body, built on experience, a means of communication, and a way of connecting with other human beings empathically. This is kind of a funny aside. Ian McGilchrist thinks that music was sort of the equivalent of grooming in great apes. That when you get together and sing together, it's kind of a way. I mean, if you think about grooming as a way of connecting with others, singing together is a way of connecting with others. That's his idea. I really love that. Okay, so I wanted to also pick up on something that the German romantic philosopher and poet Novalis has said about art. He says, or I'm not quoting him, this is a paraphrase, art aspires constantly towards the condition of music. I can't speak to other kinds of art, but I certainly think that poetry aspires to the condition of music. All right. So art song is a form of music that arguably has been around for a very long time, but it gained popularity, particularly in the 19th century. And it was a way for composers would take poetry written by some of the noted poets of the time. So the art song, many of the art songs that were written in the 19th century were setting the poetry of Goethe and Heinrich Heine and Paul Verlaine. And Victor Hugo. You see lots of their poems were set as art song. And continuing today, as I said at the beginning, composers are setting poetry to music. All right, so I'm really sort of, that's kind of the entirety of what I want to say to you about art song. I'm not a deep art song knower, but I am a poetry knower. And so what I want to do is explore a particular poem that has been set by a lot of people. And I want to think about the poem and what it's doing musically, and then notice what composers have done with it. So the poem we're going to look at is actually a poem I know you all know, and perhaps some of you have memorized. It is Robert Frost's wonderful poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. So I'm going to, I've shared it with you, and I hope you'll forgive me. I'll just read it to you so we remember the poem. I hope this doesn't get crazy over the course of our time here today, me talking about this poem in some great detail. But here it is, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So in a letter to Frost's friend, Louis Untermeyer, who is a poet and a wonderful critic, Frost called this poem his best bid for remembrance. Perhaps it's the one he's remembered for because it is so easily remembered, and we'll notice reasons for that in a minute. Perhaps it's remembered because even though we no longer get around on horses, I think I read somewhere that Robert Frost had a horse named Eunice. Perhaps it's remembered because even though we don't get around on horses, we know this experience of pausing to take in a scene and what it's like in that moment to be struck with our obligations, with the way the world calls us to our duties and tasks. Frost's friend Untermeyer said of it, few poems have said so much in so little. So how does Frost do this? So what I'm embarking on here is effectively what a composer might do when they come to a poem. Lots of composers have observed that they read a poem and they just know they want to set it, something about the poem speaks to them, but then they'll sit down and take time and really look closely at what's going on in the poem. So the first observation to make, I think, is it's a super compact poem, right? There's not, it's not very long. It's got four stanzas. Each of the stanzas is a quatrain. It's called a quatrain, so it's a stanza of 4 lines. So a total of 16 lines. There are only 108 words in this poem, and of those, only 15 of them are 2-syllable words, and only one is a word of 3 syllables. It's the word promises, which perhaps is the most important word of this poem. I think you could argue that. So pretty compact, right? Every line is what is called a tetrameter line. That is to say, each line has 4 beats, 4 heavy beats. That's a tetrameter line. So whose woods these are, I think, I know, a tetrameter line, right? So I was going to observe that tetrameter lines, a poem built of tetrameter lines gets a pretty bad rap in poetry world. And that's mostly because it gets to be kind of sing-songy and weirdly repetitive. It doesn't, you don't see lots of poems built on tetrameter lines. So one, and even not a lot of hymns are set on tetrameter lines. It's called a long hymnal measure. So it has that idea of hymn built into it. But you don't see them very often. One of the ones you might know is I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day, a Christmas song. So you could sing Stopping by Woods to that. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though, and so forth. Right. Another one, the one that people love to sort of joke about, is Hernando's Hideaway, which I'll sing, and I'll apologize to this because I think this is kind of an earworm, but it goes like this. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though, and on it goes. So that's tetrameter lines, right? So what do we have here? We have a poem of 4 stanzas, each stanza 4 lines, and each line 4 beats. It's a super regular and tidy poem. All right. It's also a poem that has a particular rhyme scheme. And I wanted to observe here that it is these 2 things, meter, a regular rhythm, and a rhyme scheme, that make poems particularly memorable. In the case of Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, the rhyme scheme is slightly complicated. So you can see the markings here on the right-hand side indicate the pattern of the rhyme. So we have a repeated rhyme in lines 1, 2, and 4. Know, though, snow. And then the rhyme, the end word of the 3rd line, becomes the main rhyme of the next stanza. So here, and then we have queer, near, year, lake, we have shake, mistake, flake, right? So that's the rhyme pattern. I wanted to talk about the last stanza. This last stanza, and especially these last 2 lines, have gotten lots of attention over the years. And partly, I think they've gotten attention because Robert Frost himself was pretty irritated with some of the interpretations that people made of his poem. And this is kind of, I think this is sort of sweet and cute, but some people make the argument that these 2 lines, because he's repeating it, he's making some comments on mortality, and the emphasis on it being a dark, dark eve, the darkest evening of the year. People read into this poem this idea that maybe the speaker is in a seriously depressive mood and thinking of his impending death, perhaps. Robert Frost kind of clears up what happened to him as a poet when he got to this last stanza. So maybe you've already caught on to this, but here's what he writes. I might confess the trade secret that I wrote the 3rd line of the last stanza in such a way as to call for another stanza when I didn't want another stanza and didn't have another stanza in me, but with great presence of mind and a sense of what a good boy I was, I instantly struck the line out and made my exit with a repeat end. So you can see that what happens here is he wrote, I can't find any evidence of what he wrote for this 3rd line originally, but he realized that he had to cut it because he couldn't write any more stanzas, right? And the reason for that, you can see that, is that if he had a different rhyme here, then it would lead to a next stanza that would be using the rhyme just as the previous stanzas do. So, maybe it was lazy, but I think he's also recognizing that he just came to the end and he needed to find a way to bring the poem to an end. It's a little bit glib on his part, I think. But I want to also observe that Frost wrote this poem with incredible ease. He had been working through the night on another project. And in the morning, he went out for a long walk. And when he came back to his desk, he had an idea for this poem and he wrote it down. It just came to him, right? And he said about that experience, I went back in and wrote the piece about the snowy evening and the little horse as if I'd had an hallucination. This doesn't happen very often to us as poets, that we have an hallucination, and just write a poem, but that's what he claims happened to him here. So we know, okay, so there was the one revision of the line, the third line of the last stanza. So we know that that was a revision that he made. But we know of another revision in this poem that I want to talk about, and will start pointing us in another way to how we can think about the relationship of poetry and music. So it turns out this stanza that we now know as "My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near," he originally wrote it, "My steaming horses think it queer. My steaming horses think it queer." And then he changed it to "My little horse must think it queer." I'm going to stop sharing for a minute, and then I'll, because maybe we're getting bored of looking at that. My steaming horses think it queer. Why would he change that line? Why make that revision? And I think there are a lot of reasons for it. So I think one of them is the detail about the steaming, right? If you're thinking about steaming horses, then you're being asked to imagine the steam coming up. And that follows from this idea of the snow. The speaker of the poem, has stopped to watch the snow come down. So you have, I think it's kind of a contrasting image of one thing coming down and one going up. And he's really focusing our attention on the snow. That could be one reason for changing it. Another reason for changing it is that if you have horses and they're steaming, that means you've been moving really quickly across the landscape, right? And the horses are all hot and steaming. And this is a poem that is it's very quiet in its nature. And we have the impression of a speaker who's moving sort of in a kind of quiet way through the woods, and then is struck by what he sees and he stops. So I would argue that he had to change it for that reason. I think there's another reason, and that is steaming horses. That means that we've got one speaker and we have two or more horses attached to the cart. And that is a different kind of relationship between the speaker and the horses. That is to say, when you have one horse, a little horse, the relationship between the speaker and the horse is super intimate. Right? It's almost as if they're sharing this experience together. Yet another reason for making this change is, in order to keep the tetrameter line, he had to add the little word "must." And I think this is really important. The way he had originally written it with the steaming horses, he had "my steaming horses think it queer." He can't know what his horses are thinking. He can imagine what they're thinking, but he can't possibly know it. So changing it to "my little horse must" reminds us that the speaker can't really know what the horses are thinking, but he can imagine it. He can empathize with the horse, which of course is part of the beauty of this poem. So those are a lot of reasons. And then there's another reason that I think matters here. And I'm going to share the screen again. And this is a reason that has to do with vowel sounds. So this is the stanza when we get to "the darkest evening of the year." I think it's a line that's really important and creates a kind of an emotional space in this poem that's different from things that have come before in the poem. So when he wrote it as "my steaming horses think it queer," let's see, sorry. When he wrote it as "my steaming horses think it queer," if we look over here, this is kind of my own sort of weird sort of characterization of the vowel sounds. We have a long I and we have this long E. And I think Frost also changed it away from steaming, or could have changed it away from steaming, because he wanted to wait and get the long E in this third line where we have a long E and a long oo and a long O and a long A. In other words, there's a shift in that third line away from shorter vowel sounds, softer vowel sounds, to these longer, harder vowel sounds that are higher in our register. Like we tend to say those E's, O's, O's higher up in our register, whereas shorter, softer vowel sounds we say lower down with a lower tone. So it's introducing a kind of edginess just at this moment. And it strikes me that that taking out steaming might have been related just to the sound of the vowels in this stanza. All right. All right. So I want to talk some more about what composers have done with, I'm going to stop sharing this again, what composers have done with Frost's poem. But before I do that, I want to talk about one other thing, which is something that happened. This has happened to other poets, but after Frost died, a chap named Latham put together an anthology of Frost's poems, and he played with Frost's use of punctuation. So those of you who know anything about Emily Dickinson know this happened to her in her lifetime. And the poet Donald Hall wrote an amazing essay about all the variety of things that Mr. Latham did with Frost's poems. But one of them is really key, and it has to do with that line, "The woods are lovely, dark, and deep." Frost wrote the poem with only one comma. The woods are lovely, comma, dark and deep. Latham put a comma after dark to make it a list, as if the woods are three things. The woods are lovely, the woods are dark, the woods are deep. But that is not what Frost meant, because Frost did use the Oxford comma. So I think we can say this with some degree of confidence. He meant the woods are lovely. How are they lovely? They are lovely because they are dark and they are deep, right? So this kind of attention to detail is exactly, I think, the kind of attention that composers bring to their settings of Frost's poems. So let's listen to some of these. So I hope I can make this work. Bear with me. All right, so the first setting we're going to listen, we'll just listen to a little bit of it. All of these you can find easily on, YouTube and other places, Spotify, if you're a Spotify fan. This one is a setting of Whose Woods These Are, of Stopping by Woods, I'm sorry, by Ned Rorem. And this setting was written in 1947. Rorem wrote a lot of music, but he especially loved writing for the voice. He wrote operas, he wrote lots and lots of art song and other pieces of music for the voice. He was also quite a remarkable writer about music, if you're interested in that. So this is Ned Rorem's setting, and the singer you can see is Susan Graham. So let's just we'll listen to a little bit of it. So the question is, what is Ned Rorem? Now we've been sort of down into the weeds of the poem. What is Ned Rorem hearing in the poem, and how is he using the voice and the piano together? So let's listen for that. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. So what I love about Ned Rorem's setting is it's kind of joyful, it's playful, right? He's like really, he's picked up on the little, I feel he's picked up on the little horse and the sleigh bells and the sort of joyousness of being outside. And you have this kind of contrast in Rorem's setting between the speaker, who the singer here is singing this sort of wild melodic line, while underneath we have a little bit more of a percussive piano. So I think Rorem is picking up on the contrast between a speaker who's sort of thinking about the world and maybe in a kind of a melancholy mood, perhaps. But at the same time, there's the delight of being in this place with his little horse. So that's Ned Rorem. So the next one I want to play for you is a composer named John Duke. John Duke was born in 1899. He died in 1984. He was an avid writer of art songs. He wrote something like 260 art songs. And thanks to Wikipedia, we have John Duke saying about it, "I think it is because of my belief that vocal utterance is the basis of music's mystery." Really love that. And, you know, I mean, I could imagine a poet saying the opposite thing about music, right? That music is poetry's mystery, as we're kind of seeing in Robert Frost's poem. So let's see what John Duke has done with, yeah, okay. Sorry. Thanks for bearing with me. Share screen. Here we are.
Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow.
Okay, I'm stopping that. Wow, could it be any different from the Ned Rorem setting, right? They're so, I just love these two next to each other. It's kind of mind-blowing. What's going on here? I mean, it seems to me that John Duke is picking up on something that starts right away in Frost's poem. Like, you listen to that first line, "Whose woods these are." It's creepy. The ooh, yeah, right? It's like John Duke has heard those vowel sounds and is picking up on them in his setting. That one, you know, whereas the Ned Rorem, we have the voice doing one thing and the piano doing another. In John Duke's, we have them, they're a little bit more responsive to one another. So it's almost as if the speaker and the location have become one a little bit in his interpretation, I would argue. All right, so the next one we're going to listen to a little bit of at the beginning, as we've been doing, is a setting by a composer named Margaret Bonds. Margaret Bonds was born in 1913 and lived until 1972. She collaborated, she was an African-American composer and pianist. She collaborated with Langston Hughes. She was the first African-American woman to perform with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. That blows my mind, and it's fantastic. So let's hear what she does. Okay, right. So I don't know if it was Margaret Bonds or Louise Topham, the singer, who switched May for Will there in the first stanza, but I have no idea. But anyway, I love that one too. And it seems to me that the piano is like being the snowfall. It's got a little bit of a tinkly character to it, right? And the voice, when she comes in, is a little bit restless, but then as the song goes on, the voice becomes more melodic. So it's quite a beautiful and different setting. All right, so here's the last, no, this is a fourth setting by a composer you'll all recognize his name, Samuel Barber. And this setting, again, like, it's just mind-blowing how these composers all do different things. So let's see, I need to. All right, so here's Samuel Barber, a little bit of Samuel Barber.
The perfection of a poem. I was surprised to learn that you wrote that charming poem.
Oh no! Oh, sorry. I have to. Stop. Oh, crud.
You're okay. We're still all here. So
I know. I don't know how to stop this.
you must have one of your other tabs must be going at the same time.
I do, but I can't make it quit.
We don't hear it right now. So
Oh, you don't hear it?
Correct.
Okay. Sorry. Oh, how irritating. Okay, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Great. I'm really sorry about that. Okay, so one of the things about the Samuel Barber is that you maybe heard is how beautifully melodic it is, right? He's really, Samuel Barber, more than any of the other composers, I feel, picks up on the form of the poem. But what I want to do is move to near the end and play so we can hear what Barber does at the end of Stopping by Woods. Here we go. Oh, I went too far. That's, I recommend you listen to the whole thing. It's so beautiful. Oh, did you not hear that? Oh, crap.
No, we did not hear that little part there.
Okay. We'll try that again.
If you share screen. Oh, perfect. It's working.
Is it working now? Okay. Going back. All right, let's listen to this. Okay. Stop sharing. All right. You heard it that time. So beautiful. I love this setting. I feel like it's Barber's really tipping his hat to the formal structure of the poem in a way that the other composers didn't exactly. But he does something else that I think is so very interesting, is the settings of the first three stanzas are melodically the same, more or less the same, a few little variations. The piano does kind of different things. And then when he gets to the last stanza, the first two lines, he does something completely differently melodically. And then for the last two lines, the repeated lines, he returns to the melody that he's been using in the other stanzas, which I think is really remarkable. And then not only that, but it's got kind of a dark sound to it, but he ends on this note that's very positive, right? So Samuel Barber is understanding the poem in a slightly different way from how other people think of it. I mean, I think Samuel Barber, maybe more than any of the others. I was going to play all the other endings for you, but we're really running out of time. More than any of the others, here's the promises aspect of the poem. Okay, so now for something completely different. I want to play for you some of a setting by Eric Whitaker, who's a composer some of you I'm sure have heard of. Eric Whitaker writes a lot of music for choral groups, and this indeed is his setting of Stopping by Woods for a choral group, and this one happens to be sung by the choir at Concordia College. So what I'm going to do is play a little bit of the beginning, and then we're going to listen to what Eric Whitaker does with the end of this song. So here we go. How different that is. I think Whitaker is picking up. Remember, I told you that the tetrameter quatrains are called long hymnal measure. So Eric Whitaker obviously is hearing that long hymnal measure that's so drawn out. You have to take these really deep breaths to get all the way through each line. But then he does that one little hiccup near the end where he pulls the breath across the line. It's very, very beautiful, very stately, very hymn-like. This is also a cappella. I'm sure you noticed that. So we're just hearing the voices working together. So now what I want to do is, what do you think Whitaker does with the end of this poem? Let's listen. Let's see. Where, hold on. Yeah. Holy cow, so different from what Samuel Barber does at the end. You know, and this is a kind of liberty that composers take with poems to do that business with all of the repetition. I counted, they sing sleep night. Oops. Oh, sorry. They sing sleep 19 times. There at the end, which, you know, if you said it 19 times, your audience would be asleep. And in a way, it's a, you know, the way Eric Whitacre said it, it becomes a lullaby there at the end. Also, I think it's interesting that it is in that stanza, you hear the sopranos get the highest they ever get on several notes there in that last stanza. So Eric Whitacre's like starts with these very stately hymn-like chords and then ends up in this very sort of quiet fading way after a lot of turmoil with all those high notes. So talk about something really different. I think this is so fascinating, right? That you can take a poem like Stopping by Woods, so familiar to all of us, and yet each one of these composers makes it, defamiliarizes it for us, makes us think of the poem in a completely new way, which is to me at the heart of what's exciting about art song. And exciting for me as a poet to hear my poems set, because all of a sudden they come back to me as something new. So I was going to end and let you hear Robert Frost read it, but I think we'll punt on that. Did you want to hear it? Or kind of? Okay, so we'll do that then. That's share the screen. It's so fun to hear his voice and to hear how he emphasizes things. So here we go.
Yes, very shortly, very directly, putting it right through.
Would you please recite it?
Want to hear me say that?
Certainly.
Yeah. Stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.
It is beautiful.
Oh,
Okay. He's so great. I love how he says, shall I say it? He's going to say his poem. And also you surely heard how he speeds up, right? When he would get to the little horse, giving his bells a shake, he speeds it up and then he slows it down again. There's not very much of a difference, but in the way he reads those last two lines. He certainly does not read that last, the repetition, you know, the second one of the repeated line. He doesn't read it more portentously, or, you know, he doesn't add extra oomph to it exactly. And I think that's pretty interesting, that we get to hear how he emphasizes the poem. So that's it. Thank you so much for being here and listening as I get down in the weeds with this beautiful poem. Yeah, thank you. I think if there are questions, we could take questions.
Hi, Athena. I have a question.
Hi, Margaret.
It's so nice to see you.
Likewise.
I wore my Decora shirt for you.
Oh, rock on. Oh, the Eagles. Very nice.
Yes. I have a question about scanning and like learning to both read and write with meter. I have a really hard time with that. I always have. Just like I can hear rhythm, but it's hard for me when I'm reading poetry myself, or and especially when I'm writing it, to like think of that. Tips on that for like people that's hard for? Like, are there ways you can just practice, or do you just have to like practice like straight up, or are there tricks? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think your question is really how to write in meter. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, and English is hard, harder than other languages. I mean, you know, metrical poetry grew out of Romance languages, right? And you can see why, right? Italian is much more metrically regular. Spanish is much more metrically regular. Then and English, you know, we're this crazy language that has words from all over the place. Yeah. So you know, I think part of why this poem came so easily for Frost was because he did write it mostly in one syllable words, which is certainly the easiest way to start. Choose one syllable words. It's when we start using 2 and 3 and more syllable words that it gets trickier, because the words are going over the feet, right? Like you have iambic feet in Frost's poem. It's 4 iambic feet. Whose woods these are, I think, right? And so you get a word like promises. We don't really say it, promises to keep, right? We don't, that doesn't make sense. So once you get into longer syllable words, it gets harder. So that's my first thing I would say, is just write a lot, you know, and remember the words, the little words, the, a, and, of, all those little words are going to be the unemphasized words usually. So I would just practice that way and then build from there once you start getting the feel for it. Yeah. Thanks for that question.
Athena, thank you so much. This was a lovely morning.
Thank you, Jared.
And just to let you know about, as we move into the last week of the NEA Big Read Door County, a few events coming up that you don't want to miss. Thursday night, Emily St. John Mandel will be doing a presentation at 7 o'clock discussing her novel, Station 11. And a week from today at 2 o'clock, film writer and novelist Patrick Somerville will be joined by Emily to talk about the screen adaptation of Station 11, which is being done for HBO Max. So please tune in to those programs and watch for the other programs that are coming up this week. Thank you all so much for joining us. Again, Athena, thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you, Jared. Thanks everybody for coming. What a treat. Nice to see familiar faces. I love you all.